You're on the road beyond. Welcome to the show. I'm Todd Duplantis.
And I'm Ike McFadden. How are you doing? Thanks for joining us.
We have got a rather interesting show for you tonight. Of course, Ike, we've talked about Bigfoot in the past. We've talked about UFOs. And our last episode, we were talking about people disappeared in national parks, and then also a little bit of wood folklore, I should say, and legends about what happens in the woods. Tonight, we're going to take you to the Ozarks, and we're going to talk about some possible lost treasure. You know, and I think I've read a book a long time ago regarding this, and I'm not sure if maybe our author that's going to join us in a moment can tell us what's going on there. But Ike, have you heard about these rumors of lost treasure? Some tie it to Confederates, some tie it to the Spanish, but either way, they're finding things out there in areas of the Ozarks.
I have to say, I mean, broadly, what I know about the Ozarks is based on the Netflix TV show. I mean, I have read something about what you're talking about. Where remind me, where is the Ozarks exactly?
Well, it stretches through parts of Missouri. I know the mountain range goes up through, we caught it up in Arkansas. So it's more in the middle or Midwest part of the country, I guess they would call it. And it is a very popular series on Netflix, but we aren't talking about that tonight, Ike.
Sorry, I get confused. I don't read the scripts.
I know. You don't read the scripts till they get here. So anyway, we're going to be talking about lost treasure in the Ozark, Ike. And let's go ahead and get started with our guest right here. His name is Bud Steed, and Bud is an author, researcher, investigator, and explorer of strange and lost legends. If it's strange, weird, or kind of scary, you can bet he's probably interested in it. Bud has been actively researching and writing for 8 years at the time of this writing, of course, and has written and published 6 books, 5 of which were reviewed and accepted for inclusion into the Library of Congress based on their folklore and historical content. Those 5 books include The Haunted Natchez Trace and The Haunted Mississippi Gulf Coast.
Yeah, that's all correct. He has also published 2 other books, each the start of its own series. Ozarks, Ghosts, and Hauntings is the first in the American Ghost series. And Lost Treasures of the Ozarks is the first book in the America's Lost Treasure series. Pardon me on that. A lot of the content within his books is historical, and it relates to typically some kind of story, a popular story, a legend, folklore. You could say he's kind of a self-described history geek. That's someone right up my alley. And it's his opinion that each ghost story, each legend or strange occurrence has its roots buried somewhere in actual historical fact.
Bud's the founder of Backroads Paranormal, a group dedicated to the investigating and researching historical sites, and the co-founder of Infinity Paranormal Research. Bud is currently residing in beautiful Ozark Mountains of southwest Missouri. Bud, welcome to the show tonight. Thanks for being here.
Well, thanks for having me on.
I want to start off talking about the lost treasures of the Ozarks. Now, I read years ago, and it wasn't in your book. It was maybe, I want to talk about maybe 15 years ago, where they tried to tie in a lot of these lost treasures to legend of Confederates, maybe after the war, that were trying to hide gold, and then also outlaws. And then it became some type of, semi-cartel throughout the years that were responsible everything from Freemason to the KKK. It was a very strange theory. But tell us what's going on in the Ozarks with this treasure that's out there.
Well, there's quite a few different treasure stories on the Ozarks. A lot of them stem from the outlaw days of Jesse James, Frank James, younger brothers. Bell Star ran through the southwestern part of Missouri, in the northwestern part of Arkansas.
Looks like we lost. There we go. You're back.
Still there? Okay. I don't know what the hell happened there. But there's a lot of stories. A lot of them stem, like you said, the Confederate gold. A lot of it had to do with the Knights of the Golden Circle. That The theory was that Jesse James was part of that, and they were stockpiling gold for the eventual rise of the Confederacy again. And there's a lot of Spanish treasure tales too. A lot of so-called Spanish treasure caves. The Spaniards worked their way up from Mexico up through Texas, up into Kansas, and back down into Missouri. A lot of people like to credit DeSoto with that, but technically he never set foot in Missouri. He died before he ever got to Missouri, and they sunk his body in the Mississippi River. But there's just a lot of different stories.
Well, that's interesting. As someone who my family has been in the South for seemingly 1,000 years or so, from the Carolinas to Georgia to Tennessee, so I'm certainly this is right up my alley. And I'm sorry if you answered this and I just didn't catch it. Was there a reason you were focusing on the South generally in this area?
I always felt more at home in the South. I lived in Mississippi for a long time, down on the Gulf Coast. Lived in Missouri for a long time. I actually ended up here through the Army. I actually went through basic training and stuff out in Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri. But you met a lot of the old timers back then in the '70s. That once you got them talking, they tell some pretty interesting stories, and those stories always kind of stuck with me and kind of fueled my imagination a little bit. And I always hunted, spent a lot of time in the woods. So you'd get out in the woods, you'd find, on rocks, big boulders, you'd see a turtle, somebody had chiseled into it.
Yeah.
Or you'd find an arrow pointing in a certain direction or something like that. And it always made me wonder, who put that there and why, and what were they hiding, So it always just, this area, the South and all the way up through Missouri always just captured my attention.
So the signs you're talking about, from what I recall in reading this many years ago, were allegedly pointing you on some type of goose chase to find the gold or the treasure that may or may not be out there. And it's tied to, maybe you can go back to this Knights of the Golden Circle, because I was always fascinated by that. Did these guys get together? I mean, after the Civil War, obviously, we all know the South lost, but after the Civil War, were they just an offshoot, or were they sanctioned by former, Confederate officers in the former Confederate government?
There's a lot of speculation there. They were actually kind of an offshoot, I guess you could say. There were a lot of former Confederates that were allegedly in the Knights of the Golden Circle, a lot of the high up-ranking officers. So the whole conspiracy thing with the Knights of the Golden Circle, it was pretty vast, and it covered a lot of different states, just not the Ozarks. But where the Ozarks is concerned with that, I mean, the James boys were the big ones on that. They, according to legend, were supposedly part of the Knights of the Golden Circle, and all the robberies that they were doing, the money that they were getting, they were supposedly hiding back for the Confederacy. And down around Eureka Springs, Arkansas, I think it is, there's supposedly a treasure cache down there that is supposed to be pretty vast. But, like most stories about treasures, you kind of got to wonder how much is true and just how much is blown up out of proportion. But
right.
Yeah, I mean, the Confederate government, there was no Confederate government when the Knights of the Golden Circle came around. But, there was a lot of high-ranking former Confederates that thought that the Confederacy was going to rise again. The lost cause was not over, and they actually had a pretty good organization from all accounts.
Now, let me ask you this: Has anything been found at this point, or are people going out and getting close to anything, or are they meeting with their untimely demise when they're searching for these things? What else can you tell us about that?
Well, there is supposedly a guy up above Bolivar, Missouri, or up north of Humansville, that had found some etchings in the rocks that supposedly was going to lead him to the treasure. He was making a pretty vocal statement online about it for the better part of a year. And then all of a sudden he just dropped off the face of the earth and nobody heard another word about it. So, there's a lot of speculation. Did he find it? Did he not find it? Did something happen to him? Nobody really knows, because, like I said, he just stopped. Nobody heard anything more out of him online. So, personally, if it was me and I found it, I wouldn't tell a freaking soul.
Yeah, he could have found it, and that's why he's disappeared. Or the other nefarious reasons. Let me ask you this. So we know the Confederate angle, and that seems like, from what you're telling me, a lot of it's legend based on some historical fact, but nobody's really found the treasure yet. What about the Spanish treasure and what the Spaniards may have left here during their expeditions? Has anyone found Spanish gold, trinkets, things that may lead them to believe that there's more Spanish treasure in the Ozarks?
Well, there's a guy down in Branson called Artie Ayers, and he's got to be well into his 90s if he's still alive. I'm not sure if he's passed away or not, but he was pretty spry for his age. And he allegedly knew where, or thought he knew where, had a map that was going to lead him to where the Spanish treasure was, that they thought was down somewhere near was that Bread Tree Mountain or something like that, Bread Table Mountain, something like that. But apparently a friend of his was out looking in the creek bed down through there and actually uncovered a silver bar. And when we were actually talking with Artie, we were doing a sizzle reel on the Yoakum dollar, and which is another pretty good treasure story. And Artie broke out a picture and showed it to us. He had it in the safety deposit box. And this thing was probably about 1.5 feet, 2 feet long, and about 6 inches wide, probably 4 inches deep from the way it looked sitting on the tailgate of the pickup truck. And it was actually silver, and it had Spanish silver or Spanish markings carved in it that had been verified. So I don't know. I mean, I know that's been found, and several people over the years have found Yoakum dollars, and the Yoakum dollars are tied to the Spanish treasure. And then I know that at one time there was a cave that had been found down near the Arkansas-Missouri line, over off of Highway 40, over off Interstate 49 down there. But the cave had actually collapsed in, and it was going to be too costly to excavate it. But before it collapsed, there were people who went in there and claimed that they had found the treasure. They'd found a Spanish breastplate and some other stuff there that they thought were going to lead them to the treasure. But yeah, there's been some stuff found. I mean, it's not all. It's just not all made up legends and stories. There's actually been some stuff found.
So is this at all like, I lived in Florida for a bit, and even until fairly recently, they were finding stuff offshore in reasonably shallow water. And as far as I recall, the way they were doing that, there was a fair amount of, digging through historical documents and trying to track down a ship's manifest or its schedule. Is that something that goes on here as well, or is it more collecting, folklore and trying to make heads or tails of it?
Well, no, there's actually been a bunch of guys that went down to Mexico and tried to track the gold and the silver trains through their records that came up. And they actually thought they were getting pretty close to where one was supposedly lost in Texas. They tracked the one train up through Kansas, the lower part of Kansas, and back down here into Missouri. But as far as I know, they haven't found anything. But yeah, I mean, it's just not all local legends. There's people that go through these historical societies and these repositories of records, and it's pretty much like looking through ships manifests. You're looking for manifests that were linked to different mule trains that were carrying silver and gold and stuff like that to give you a starting point, because they checked in at different outposts and stuff like that, and there was records of those kept, and there was relays of messages sent back of this is where this particular train is at and that kind of stuff. So there's actually a lot of records out there.
Have you found that some people looking for this gold or treasure have been able to get investors? I mean, you see TV shows on Discovery where for the past 10 years, they've been digging in a hole looking for, the Ark of the Covenant or something like that. But obviously there are investors out there. Have you heard of people that are getting investors to maybe look for these treasures in the Ozark?
I've not heard of anybody doing that in the Ozarks. You hear a lot of that associated with treasure hunts, offshore. Where somebody thinks they've pinpointed where a ship went down that that was supposed to have a particularly vast amount of gold or silver on it, but you don't hear too much about that in the Ozarks. So people in the Ozarks were kind of closed mouthed. If somebody thinks that they've got a line on something, they're not going to spread it around. They're going to look and try to figure it out for themselves.
Let me ask you this before Ike jumps in. The Netflix show Ozark, any truth to that with anything out in the Ozarks?
No, not really. I started watching some of that show, and it kind of casts us in a pretty poor light. But I mean, this area is like any other place. It's got its problems. There's drugs and stuff like that, like anywhere else. But we're not particularly burying bodies in our backyards and that kind of stuff. Although I will say there's probably not some there.
Well, very interesting. So let's talk a little bit about your American Ghost series. And can you tell me what are some memorable cases that you can talk about, or maybe some of the states that you've covered?
Well, let's see. I've written quite a few books. I've written 8 as of now. My bio is not up to date, which I should probably get that fixed. But Alabama is my latest one out. Alabama, Hunted Heart of Dixie, and the Alabama or the Ozarks book. That one I particularly like to write because there was so many stories associated with it. This area here has a really high concentration of Scots Irish, and
Sure.
a lot of them back in the day came from the Appalachians, so they brought their superstitions with them and stuff like that. And there's just a ton of really good stories here. And that one was really good to write. Like the Ozarks Madonna, the grieving woman whose child died. People see her on different trails, and there's just all kinds of really cool stories out there. But yeah, I wrote one about Baton Rouge and Mississippi Gulf Coast and Fort Smith and Van Buren, Arkansas, and Northwest Arkansas. And yeah, I've written quite a few different books. There's a lot of good stories out there.
So let me ask you this, and I don't care what the answer is. I'm usually sort of the local skeptic here on the show. Do you believe in ghosts like this, or do you just appreciate it from a folklore, cultural standpoint, or what is your take after having looked into this for a bit?
Well, I actually did my first formal paranormal investigation October 17th of 1979. So I've been doing this a little over 40 years. I've seen a lot of stuff I can't explain. I mean, I've seen full-bodied apparitions. I've heard voices where nobody was there. Got really good EVPs that I recorded that I knew I was the only one in the place. Nobody else was around, but yet there's that voice on the recorder. So yeah, I'm a skeptical believer. I think it's probably the best way to put it. I don't take every little thing I see as evidence that it's paranormal. You try to debunk it and see if there's any kind of logical explanation for it before you just throw the, oh my God, it's paranormal, out there. But yeah, I'm a skeptical believer. I come at things wanting to believe that it's true, but still wanting to prove that it's not.
Let me ask you this, because I like to ask guests who have seen apparitions what they've seen, because I've heard apparitions can look like a real person standing next to you. Maybe they're you don't see the lower part of their body, or they could be misty and transparent. What was your experience with that?
Well, I've seen them that were kind of misty and transparent, that they actually formed right in front of me, pretty much about 5 feet away from me. One formed up. I saw this swirling mist that started to take shape, and all of a sudden there was a lady standing there, but there was nothing from the knees down. I've seen a person walk across the floor right into a wall, which we come to figure out that there used to be a doorway there where that wall was at. And the spirit that we actually saw was a residual haunting. It wasn't an intelligent haunting. They were just going through the motions like they had done for years. But I've seen, quite a few different versions of, I guess you could say versions of apparitions, I suppose you could say, from the misty to the almost solid looking people.
So what are you working on coming up next? Or it seems like you must have, by this point, almost worked your way through the South. Are you going to move into the Pacific Northwest or the Midwest or Mexico, or what are you working on?
Well, actually, I'm working on a book now. My partner there, Eileen Jones, she was in that documentary, The House in Between. We're working on some investigations on different haunted historic county jails. I'm going to get that book done. There's quite a few out there that are pretty interesting. And then I got another book that I've been working on that's on haunted bed and breakfasts. It's kind of interesting. I'm trying to go stay at all the different ones that are supposedly haunted so that I can give a firsthand view of it. So. But and I've got a couple of novels I'm working on, but those kind of take the back seat to the other stuff. The other stuff's a lot more fun.
Yeah, well, that sounds interesting. It's. I wonder if in 100 years there will be tales of haunted Airbnbs.
I don't know. That's a good question.
Bud, we want to appreciate you joining us on the show. I know folks can find you at budsteed.com. All of your books are available there?
Yeah, they're available there, and at Amazon.com and Barnes & Noble. I'm pretty much everywhere out there. If you just plug my name into the internet, you're going to find me somewhere.
But I want to get you back on the show in the future, and I want to dig deeper into your paranormal investigations. So we'd love to have you back on again and pick your mind on the paranormal subjects.
Yeah, anytime you want me, just give me a holler.
All right. Bud Steed, author, joined us on the show. You can check him out at budsteed.com. Thanks for being here, Bud.
Glad to be here, man. I think I appreciate you guys actually having me on. It was kind of fun.
We appreciate you being here. Thank you. All right, Ike, I know you spend a lot of time up in Tennessee. When you were up there, you ever find anything peculiar in the woods that make you think there may be some treasure in there?
To give you an honest answer, I don't know that I've ever seen anything particularly treasure-oriented, but something he was mentioning about you do find odd things in the woods. Yeah. And I spent, ever since I was a child, being in fairly rural areas in the South, not just Tennessee. I remember one time I was out, probably half a mile from the house in a small town and ran across something very weird. It was like an old abandoned swimming pool. It looked like it had been maybe abandoned in the 20s or 30s and maybe had been a public pool, but there was no road there. There was no clear path. There was like a swimming pool in the forest. And inside the swimming pool was what appeared to be an abandoned old Model T car.
Wow. Yeah. You wish you could have got that out of the woods.
Well, it may still be there if you want to come.
Well, let's get a hold of me this summer and we'll go look for that.
All right.
All right, folks, we're going to move on to our news for the evening. Here's a look at some of the weird, tantalizing, and just plain bizarre stories posted from our partners at the Full Spectrum Project. You can find them on Facebook. They're partners with this show. They do have radio shows online as well, so we encourage you to follow them. All right, Ike, this is coming to us from, briefly-platform.com. Okay.
Todd, do we have anything about demon priests?
It's funny you should ask that because the next story is about demon priests that haunt San Francisco. All right, let's get into that. Ike, this legend has it that a demonic ghost of a former priest still stalks the Mission San Francisco Solano. All right, for those keeping score, back in the 18th century, Spanish soldiers in California set forth building missions in an attempt to convert the indigenous people to Catholicism. Okay. Flash forward to the next century, where Padre Jose Altamira illegitimately built one of the last missions in the current haunted one. Okay, you following me so far, Ike?
I don't know what is an illegitimate. No, go ahead.
Okay, he went against the church. All right. Anyway, inside that mission, it said that the good old Padre baptized more than 1,300 local natives. In the process, more than 900 of them died from mistreatment and diseases they were not previously exposed to prior to the Europeans arriving. Heard that story before? All right. You're well familiar with that. Anyway, because of the shady and deadly methods, the Padre was forced out after a couple of years. He wasn't ready to go, but he was forced out because of a rebellion by the natives, the same people he was trying to think he was saving. Well, he may have been forced out, but his spirit is still said to roam the grounds of the mission and has been seen in the priest's quarters, all right, very near that area. To this day, Ike, get this, apparitions of the priest are still seen, along with the ghost of, you ready for this? A bear.
And why a bear? Is that something because it's like the California national?
I was going to say, have you seen the California? Have you seen? So there's your inspiration for the California flag. So there we go. All right. That story, once again, posted on the internet, folks. So it has to be true. You know that. All right. Next story. This is actually a fascinating story. It's going to tie into a movie, which I'm sure you have seen, Real Life Zombies. I've always loved zombie movies. Have you been a fan of those? Night of the Living Dead, Day of the Dead, Dawn of the Dead, Mall of the Dead?
I was, and this is an interesting debate that's going around at the moment. I was sort of a fan originally of the slow zombies, but I kind of got on board with the fast zombies. Do you have a zombie speed preference?
Yeah. The fast zombies make it more interesting, but it's just, they're a lot more terrifying when they're fast. You want zombies. I like my zombies slow and falling apart.
Okay, I'll remember that for Christmas.
Yeah, and where you shoot them in the head, you're done, and you just move on to the next one. That's the way you like your zombies. Fast zombies freak me out.
So are we about to have a story about real life zombies?
Yeah, this is they're based on real life things here. The next story comes to us from the Facebook page of author Troy Taylor. Ike, one of my favorite zombie movie, and we all know about the zombie apocalypse. We're all worried about that. But what about real life zombies? Well, on May 2nd, 1962, a Haitian man named Clairvius Follow that name because it's going to pop up a lot. Clairvius Narcisse died of some sort of mysterious illness, or so it seemed at that time. A little more than 18 years later, his sister Angelina was shopping in a local market and saw a terrifying, vacant-eyed man lurching toward her. Angelina couldn't help but scream. The man was her dead brother, Clairvius. How could that happen? Well, she'd been at his funeral nearly 20 years ago. Now he's a zombie. That's right. Well, let's go back to the spring of 1962 when Clairvius checked into a hospital with fever and body aches, normal symptoms. He was diagnosed with a number of issues from hypertension to heart failure. Shortly after his arrival in the hospital, Clairvius says he felt a tingling in his body and his skin got pale, his lips turned blue, and he died. So he thought. I mean, it makes sense. The doctors declared him dead. His sister Angelina was there. She signed the death certificate. There was a funeral. He was buried, put in the ground, or so they thought. You see, Clairvius, the dead man, later told an account that he was not dead, but he was paralyzed. In fact, he was aware of everything that happened after he allegedly died, which he did not, if you're keeping up with the story. He remembered the sheet being placed over him, being placed in a coffin, even had a scar to show to say where one of the nails was nailed into him, and from his coffin. Clairvius said that he was buried in the cemetery. He was dug up by a voodoo practitioner called a Bokor, who revived him from his paralyzed state, Ike. For the next 2 years, he was forced to drink a mixture of poisons and kept in what he called a functional stupor. And he was then forced to work as a slave on a sugar plantation. All right, all of that in Haiti. He says during this time, he was literally turned into a walking zombie, hence the name, unable to think or act on his own until the curse was broken when the Bokor died. Then things got really weird, Ike. Here's where they get weird, because he figured out that his brother was the one who sold him to the zombie farm. All right. He remained in hiding until his brother died and then reappeared to his sister after the brother died. The story got the attention of a graduate student at Harvard University named Wade Davis. He went down to Hawaii or Haiti to investigate this. He wrote 2 books about it. And here's where you'll recognize Ike. The first was called The Serpent and the Rainbow. Makes sense? Well, the book became a bestseller and later inspired the film. And now Clairvius reportedly lived another 14 years where he died just a normal death after he reappeared in the marketplace. So there you have it, Ike. How did The Serpent and the Rainbow come about? It was based on a true story of Clairvius.
Yeah, that's right. That actually, believe it or not, that's something I know a little bit about. That Wade Davis story is interesting. It was actually, as I recall, it was something called tetrodotoxin, which was something, I think comes out of like a puffer fish or something like that essentially lowers their respiration rate so much that they can appear dead. Yeah. And I believe, this is the part of my memory is fuzzy on, but I believe Wade Davis had some kind of interaction with Pfizer about looking into this because he thought there might be some way to put people into sort of a medical induced coma and operate on them and then revive them. But I don't recall whatever happened with that. Do you?
No, I don't. I know he probably decided to turn it into a book and make it a movie, made his money, and that just retired. That's what I'm thinking he did.
Or he invented COVID.
Hey, we don't even want to go down that road. Hey, folks, there's the story of Serpent and the Rainbow. Ike, that about wraps up our show. You got any more expeditions planned? Are you going to be here next week?
I am going to be actually in our knocking around the Tennessee backlands. So who knows? Maybe I'll have a field report from the woods with a Model T car. All right. I want to see that Model T car. And we'll be broadcasting live on Tuesday night of next week. Don't worry, we'll remind you again on Facebook Live, The Road Beyond Podcast. Thanks for joining us on the show, folks. You can check out our YouTube channel, The Road Beyond Podcast. Subscribe to our channel. You'll get notifications when new shows are posted. And Ike, we're also available on Facebook and Twitter. Yes, all the kids love it. All the kids love it. And we're suitable for framing as well. Ike, thanks for being here. We'll see you next week. See you next time, dude. It was good fun. And thanks to Nathan and Peter for hanging out. All right. Thanks to all of you for hanging out. We'll see you next time on The Road Beyond.